Okay, welcome to the last component of this class. It's component 3. I've titled it The Foundations and Methods for Evaluating Public Policy Effectiveness. In specific, we're going to be looking at benefits and costs measures. Now, this is the last component, and unlike my previous descriptions, it's going to be shorter than the previous two. We only have 2 weeks left in this class, and I'm going to have to wrap this up relatively promptly. Now, what I'm not going to do to you is cram 3 weeks worth of lecture into 2 weeks. What I'm going to do is edit it down to what I think are bite-sized chunks and feed it to you that way. And the way I'm also going to plan this last component, which I think is going to be easier on a few of you, is that there's only going to be one big assignment at the end. Now, it's not going to be big as in it's going to take you several days to do. It's going to be an assignment with 2 parts. It's going to be an assignment that's similar to what you just got done doing. On the first part of it, I'm going to have you do some analysis. And on the second part of it, I'm going to have you do some writing in the form of a memo or a very short paper dealing with a specific set of topics and concepts related to benefit cost analysis. And then we'll evaluate this course based on that work. The way that's going to work out then is that this part of the class is going to account for 30% of your grade. The previous 2 parts each counted for 35% of your grade. Most of you have been doing okay up to now, and so you're doing okay, and you're going to be able to follow along. Now, the way this is going to evolve, we're going to dish this out over the next 2 weeks. This first week is going to be heavily front-loaded with lecture. I'm going to be talking to you about all kinds of concepts and themes and ideas that are associated with us understanding benefit cost analysis, but more importantly for us understanding what are the roles of government in providing certain kinds of goods or services, and how do we know whether those roles are being carried out properly. So I'm going to spend some time. That means we're going to have a reintroduction to some basics of economics, a reintroduction to some of the foundations of how the market works, and we're going to relearn some of those things that you probably long ago forgot, but we're going to learn them again because they're important. Then we're going to start very slowly but very systematically engaging in some skill building. Now, most of the tools for what we're going to do, you already have. You actually learned some of the tools in the first component when you had to characterize and think in terms of how do you value something over different periods of time. Remember when you had to adjust information for inflation? Well, we're going to have to use some of the very same concepts to do benefit cost analysis, but we're going to have to think about all that information a little bit differently. So other than that, you're really not going to be learning anything fantastically new. What you're going to be learning how to do is to think about and characterize information in a different way. So that's going to be the goal of this third component, getting you so that you understand what happens or how we're supposed to approach. The words "supposed to approach" are important. How we're supposed to approach decision-making and investments in the public sector. What should the public sector consider when it's about to enact, enable, create, or produce some sort of program or some piece of infrastructure? What are the benefits? What are the costs? How do we measure those? What are the criteria for determining what constitutes a benefit and what constitutes a cost? And what are the things that we have to look out for and think about when we're doing this? So that's what this component is all about. Now, there's going to be not a lot. There's only going to be a few reading. I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to front load this with lecture, and most of what I would have you read in a book chapter, I'm going to have up here on slides. So I'm not going to just repeat myself or make you go back and read that. So what I'm going to do is post in the readings a set of relatively short either articles or pieces that other people have done or that I have done on benefit cost analysis, or examples of modern benefit cost analysis. And we'll get to that down the road here of an example that I'm going to have you look at. And so that, the readings are going to be relatively light. There is going to be one very small part, and I'll list it up here in just one of the next sessions, that you're going to read in Garrett and Leatherman on the Web Book of the Regional Sciences on benefit cost analysis. And I don't know, I think there's only going to be about 5 short readings for you to try to pay attention to as we're moving along. So here's the way this is going to start out. I'm going to start out with talking about benefit cost analysis from a historical standpoint and try to trace it historically up to the present. This is going to take a while. I think this lecture is important. This lecture is important because it gives you a chance to understand the evolution of government, the evolution of the economy, the evolution of world events, and the evolution of approaches to decision making over, let's say, the last 100 years, and how they've led to an increase or a decrease in the propensity to use benefit cost analysis and the addition of rules. So what is it? What is benefit cost analysis? I'm going to start out with that, and it's a form of decision making that we use in the public sector. Many people use the word benefits casually. They use it all the time. They use it in politics. They use it in business. They say that was a very that program provided lots of benefits to society. Well, they're not talking about the benefits that I'm talking about when I talk about benefit cost analysis. They're using it in a general, colloquial way. They're saying that something was beneficial. When we use benefits and costs, when we're doing public policy evaluation, it means something very concrete, very narrow. And so there's rules and there are procedures, and the words have specific meaning. They are defined quite well, both at the state level and at the federal level, with regard to the rules and procedures for properly evaluating programs. So I'm going to be very rigid with regard to how I define what constitutes a benefit and a cost. Where did it come from? Whence did it emanate? Where did it come from? How did it evolve? I'm going to get into that in some of the early examples. Why do we do it? And well, we do it because there is an economics foundation and a justification for doing this, and in so doing this, we're trying to demonstrate that society is better off because of a government action. Over time, what were the political conditions or considerations determining its use? Again, over the last 100 years, many things have happened in the United States. The roles and responsibilities of the federal government, the state governments, and local governments have changed. And again, both political and practical considerations determining the usage of these methods have evolved over time. Who were the original practitioners? And that's mostly what was it used for, and what was it applied to early on, and then how has that evolved over time? And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time wrestling with those concepts. And then we're going to come up to the present, and where is the practice today? What is the modern state-of-the-art of benefit cost analysis? Like many things that we've been doing for a long time, we're still making the same old mistakes as we used to, but we're also doing some incredibly innovative and exciting new things in terms of being able to identify benefits that we weren't able to measure just a few short years ago. Again, just very quickly, our ability to measure and value clean water or clean air relative to potential health consequences given some alternative scenario where the water or the air wasn't clean. Our ability to do that, both epidemiologically and economically, has advanced remarkably in just the last 25 years that I've been involved in this kind of research and practice. And we're doing nothing but getting better over time. So where's the practice today? We'll try to get to that and do a good job of it. I have everything here and I have everything here, so I may look back and forth in my notes as I move along here, mostly because my notes have more information. The primary aim of benefit cost analysis is to determine whether or not, and I've got that wrong, it says whether the cost, let me fix that right off the bat, whether the benefits of a program outweigh the cost. Outweigh the costs, and we want the benefits of a program to outweigh the cost because we want to be able to demonstrate that socially we're doing something good. And everybody does this, whether you're evaluating buying a new sofa or a flat screen TV or remodeling your basement or landscaping your yard, you have determined some value to that action, a benefit. And you, if you're a smart consumer, you are considering the costs, and the costs are what do I get for what I'm spending, and another part of the costs are what else could I have done with that money. So we do this all the time, whether we're buying a Corolla versus a Honda Accord, or I guess it's a Civic, or whether we're buying a Sharp TV versus an LG TV. We implicitly in our head go through a benefit and a cost calculation. We want to maximize what we get relative to the amount of money that we're going to spend. And in maximizing what we get, it might be an array of features. It might be a set of capabilities. It might be, in the case of a TV set, a specific kind of functionality. It works okay with my laptop or with some other devices, or it has a level of resolution that pleases me, or it doesn't have a level of resolution that I'm indifferent to. And so we're weighing and we're trading off all of these things as we decide what to buy and what to pay for it. So that's implicit in what we're doing. It's part of us being good consumers. But this gets much more complex when we use the word government programs, because unlike the market, where ours is a market society, where we let the notions of profit and loss basically send signals to producers as to what to make or what not to make. Unlike the market, governments do more important things. Governments are concerned with other kinds of factors. They're concerned with fairness, and they're concerned with public safety, and they're concerned with all manner of thing that isn't traded in the market. And so government activities often involve more complicated issues, and it's hard to both price and or value those activities. And there are limits to what governments can do. There's limits to the amount of money the governments have to use. There is tremendous competition for the uses of that money, and so the provision of public goods, the kind of goods that the government provides, always entail trade-offs. It's not black and white or either or. It's many, many different shades of gray with regard to what about program A versus program B? Can we fund part of program A and part of program B and a little bit of program C? It's not black and white. It's not profit loss. I buy this or I buy that. It's a series of things that society has already deemed to be good things, and what we're doing is we're trying to make trade-offs among all of the competing choices and among all of the millions of competing choosers of what matters to people when they look to their governments. We all look to our governments for different things, and maybe you come from a political heritage that thinks the less government, the better, and maybe you come from a political heritage that thinks that the things that governments do are beneficial and uplifting. And we've got tension between an active and involved role of government versus a laissez-faire and let's let the market solve most of the problems and only have government when it's absolutely necessary. Well, we have that kind of tension, and we're going to have to live with that kind of tension no matter what. That's part of the process here in the United States. But benefit cost analysis has rules. And because it has rules, it's supposed to separate itself out and exist somewhat distinctly from that ideological or political process. So the basis for benefit cost analysis, the person that I rely most on for my lecture notes and what I know about this topic is a gentleman who just passed away a year or so ago named Edward Gramlich. Before I move on, Edward Gramlich recently retired, and he did recently pass away, but he recently retired as one of the governors of the Federal Reserve Board. And he was a good guy. And he was the one who preparatory to this housing bubble, raised the hue and cry and said, this is unsustainable. We need to do something about this. And that there are going to be significant and serious social and private sector consequences to this housing bubble. And he was ignored. And it's a shame because had he been listened to, perhaps our economy and society might have ended up being a little bit better off than it's ending up being as a consequence of this current recession that we're in. And I trust that for the duration of however long this course is taught, we're going to still be talking about the recession that we're in 2009. All righty. Ed Gramlich, benefit cost analysis is, quote, nothing more than a logical attempt to weigh the pros and cons of a decision, and ultimately something like it must necessarily be employed in any rational decision. Basically stating the obvious. It's what we do. If we're smart, if we're calculating, if we're discerning, if we're rational, we engage in benefit cost analysis. So, benefit cost analysis indeed is rational. It has a rational, logical foundation. It fits and is in keeping with what is called rational comprehensive planning. And I'll get to that in a little bit here. But the idea that if we think about enough of the parts of a program or a process or an attempt to engage in a new set of rules for society, if we really think about all of the parts and the pieces and who are the actors and who might be benefited and who might be harmed, and which agencies might be involved and how they might change, if we think about all of these things, it's called comprehensive decision making, and it fits. Rational, logical processes are part of what we call comprehensive decision making or comprehensive planning. Benefit cost analysis is systematic or rigorous. We use the word rigorous in science and any kind of discipline that says that we have basic agreed upon scientific principles that we use. We don't make things up as we go along. We use the rules of mathematics and economics and even physical rules, if appropriate, in doing benefit cost analysis. Like good research anywhere, it is replicable. Therefore, it is reviewable and testable. Replicable means somebody else could look at what you did and do it themselves. And reviewable and testable. I will give you an example, and I don't mind naming names. We have a lot of government agencies that are notorious for obfuscation in the production of benefits and cost studies. There are two organizations that may think it libelous that I name them, but the United States Army Corps of Engineers, which has never met a dam it didn't like, is somebody who over the years has tried to get, in a time or two, the benefits and costs calculations so that they work out so they could build a dam, because that's what they're very good at. They love to build dams, and you can understand the institutional incentives to build another dam. It's what makes those people happy. We have another organization called the NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service, that over the years has, rather than conserve resources, has begun to engage in the promotion of recreational opportunities out here in the Plains States. And I had the opportunity myself to review one of their projects a few years ago, and my primary complaint was I couldn't figure out where they got their numbers. There were so many things I couldn't figure out. It was phenomenal. They violated the first rule of benefit cost analysis, is that I could not replicate what they did. I could not review it competently. I'm competent, but critically in the way where I could offer them the kind of feedback that says, well, no, you made a decision here that wasn't appropriate, or yes, you did this right. I don't have a clue what they did. And these kinds of things happen. These kinds of things happen in every kind of government system. So something like that wasn't replicable, wasn't reviewable, and I couldn't test it. I had to evaluate that project on an indirect basis, and that's not the way you want to do something. Benefit cost analysis, or some type of decision making, is a desirable counterweight to other forms or basis for decision making, namely political, prevailing opinion, conventional wisdom, which we don't want to rely on conventional wisdom. However smart and how much common sense you think you have, trust me, it's not the best foundation for making a lot of decisions. Fiats, special interest considerations, or fads. Folks, we've had biofuels fads that have offered up implicit benefits to society as a consequence of the rapid buildup in biofuels production in the United States. Oops. More recent research has found that biofuels production maybe isn't beneficial to society, that the purported greenhouse gas gains and the value of energy security created by biofuels development, at least to the point where it is in 2009, actually maybe wasn't such a good deal. Maybe we've got to rethink how we approach this. And we need to think. We have other things right now, fads. We have local foods. Somehow or other, many people believe the production and promotion, and governments ought to be involved in reconfiguring where food is made and produced in the United States because people say it's better. Well, we can test that. It's a fad right now, but we can test that. We have a lot of talk in the current government administration about creating green jobs and green opportunities. Well, first of all, it's a fact. We've had green before. We've been green. We were green in the 70s, and we were green in the 80s, and we tried to be green for a little bit in the 90s, and now we're green again. There's all kinds of things that we can do, but it's a fad right now. But specific projects, policies, ideas, concepts, or initiatives, they can be tested. And we would want to use good, sound methods for doing that. It is logical in its orientation. It is not intended to replace common sense. It's not intended to replace. The collective wisdom of a group is wisdom. And benefit cost analysis is a technical piece of information that informs the decision-making process. and it's supposed to be compatible with forms of decision making. So it's not intended to replace. You don't punt or defer to the mathematics. You look at the mathematics, you evaluate the mathematics, and then you decide a value judgment, if indeed this is a good thing. And a good thing, like Martha Stewart would say, is who knows? It depends on who you are and what the group is. So benefit cost analysis is rigorous, and it's scientific, and it's got rules. And we want to follow those rules when we're doing this. Now, benefit cost analysis as a practice, it goes back, the thinking about it actually goes back farther than what I'm describing, but it goes back to some writings in the mid-1800s by a guy named Jules Dupuy. And he was an engineer and an economist, and he was pondering the value of certain kinds of public spending, and thinking in terms of something like, I put a bridge across a span, and this bridge allows people on side A and side B now to interact with one another. How do I get my money back for spending on this bridge? Who benefits, and by what amount do they benefit? How do I define the benefits of putting this bridge? Do I make people pay per capita on side A and people per capita on side B? And then I make them do this, and then how do I demonstrate to them and to me and to society that in so doing what we're going to do through taxation or whatever, that they're actually better off? How do I demonstrate that? Well, these are ideas that he came up with, and benefit cost analysis owes its underlying assumptions to a discipline, subdiscipline of applied welfare economics, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. And applied welfare economics meaning economic activities that were able to demonstrate, enhance people's welfares. And your welfare is enhanced if you're better off, and you're better off because you're more safe, or your costs of living have gone down, or your ability to buy things has gone up, or your health has improved because of something that's happened in society, or the probability that your health will deteriorate has gone down because of something that's happened in society. So that's what welfare economics deals with, and so that's the foundation for what we're doing, and we'll get to that later on. That'll be the economics lecture. In the United States, the history of benefit cost analysis goes back to the River and Harbor Act of 1902, in which required the United States Corps of Engineers to assess federal government expenditures for navigation against the benefits received commercially. So it was used originally to justify navigation investments. Now think about what we did to maintain or improve our inland waterways. We channeled waterways so that they were straight. Eventually we built locks and dams that allowed for and regulated the water flow, but also allowed us to have a regular flow of traffic up and down the river. We provided a means and a mechanism to much more efficiently move inland traffic. And so some of the early remember, our federal government didn't spend diddly on anything except national defense. For the most part in the early years, and basic federal government operations, there wasn't much of a role in developing the inland infrastructure. There weren't federal highways, or they were limited, federal byways. And so in river transportation was one of the early areas where benefit cost analysis was applied. And it said the government, the Corps of Engineers, going way back, it's the United States Army Corps of Engineers, by the way, had to assess the benefits relative to the cost relative to the benefits received commercially. And who were the commercial beneficiaries? Well, of course, it's the shippers. Well, but if shipping is done much more effectively, much more efficiently, allows for larger boats, allows for fewer disruptions, all kinds of things, making the movement of goods from port A to port B to port C to port D much more regular. Well, over time, that means the cost of delivering those goods goes down. And if the cost of delivering those goods goes down, then the benefits to society go up because I can buy more of those goods, and I think that's a good thing if I can buy more things. So that's the antecedents. That's the earliest antecedents. There was some other stuff in between those years, but more importantly, and I think it's something that we need to think about because it's analogous to the time that we're in now. Benefit cost analysis became systematically ingrained in federal decision-making as a result of what was called the Flood Control Act of 1936. Now, what's going on in 1936? We're still in the Depression. We're still in the first year of the Roosevelt administration, and in the Roosevelt administration, that government has been engaging in an array of public works programs, the Works Projects Administration, the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and most notably, the Tennessee Valley Authority. And so, under the Flood Control Act of 1936, it required that the government undertake projects for flood control purposes, and this is where the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, if the benefits to whomsoever they may accrue are in excess of the estimated cost. Now, this is the first time it's stated exactly that way, that the government shall undertake flood control projects where it can be demonstrated that the benefits are going to exceed the costs. And the benefits, of course, from flood control are the reduced amount of damages caused by floods. And how do you evaluate that? Well, the historical experience. And so we get that antecedent for benefit cost analysis. It has a very, very, very strong component during the Great Depression. Let's think of all the things. We have the Columbia River projects, Grand Coulee Dam, Hoover Dam, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Yes, there are all kinds of things that are going on, and these were applied to public projects, Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Reclamation, Tennessee Valley Authority, etc. But we had a problem. Each practicing entity developed its own standards and methods for applying benefit cost analysis to its particular concerns. So you can see where one agency's definition of what constituted a benefit might differ from another agency's definition. And consequently, benefit cost analysis was manipulated to justify projects that respective bureaucracies might have been interested in pursuing, perhaps more so than used as an actual to actually document social benefits and costs. And you can see this happen anywhere. We have something called, we call it log rolling in Congress of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, I'll vote for your program if you vote for mine. There are all kinds of things in modern society that are being either promoted or funded that truly, truly have questionable benefits to society. If you remember back a little while, there was something up in Alaska called a Bridge to Nowhere. Basically, it was a several $100 million bridge that was going to link an island of just a couple of hundred people with some other place in Alaska. And it was very, very hard on any rational basis to demonstrate. Well, we've had that stuff go on for a long time. And so benefit cost analysis moved into a territory where it was discredited. And it was discredited because people weren't doing it correctly, or people were doing it their own way and there weren't rules. And after, we have World War II and we have all of what happens in World War II. And when we have all of these things that happened in World War II, they were seriously thinking of the value and necessity of government activity. World War II demonstrated that that both in terms of the war effort as well as maintenance of institutions and basic infrastructure in society, that the federal government's role, both with the Depression as well as the mobilization effort during World War II, the government's role in society had expanded exponentially over what it was prior to the Depression. And now the government's role is large, and conditions now changed after World War II because we were much more interested in developing public works, roads, sewers, bridges, developing our economy, as well as job creation. We had hundreds of thousands of men coming back from the war, and we had the surviving economy in the world that had industrial capability. Japan, Germany, most of Europe, and Great Britain had their economies decimated, including the Soviet Union. And so most of the world's industrial capacity was in the United States. And so the United States government did everything it could to boost and bolster employment and to provide the kinds of public works that enabled industrial development and enabled the United States economic role to emerge preeminent and to remain dominant. And so the U.S. was a major world power. It accumulated a tremendous amount of wealth rapidly, and because it accumulated a lot of wealth rapidly, it had a lot of resources for public spending that it didn't have before. Well, we needed standards, and benefit cost analysis didn't have the kinds of standards. So standards were hammered out in 1946 by something called the U.S. Federal Interagency River Basin Committee Subcommittee on Benefits and Costs. A lot of names there, but what it did is it produced a report that established, for the first time now, agreed upon principles for benefit cost analysis. It was called Proposed Practices for Economic Analysis of River Basin Projects. Now, we still have waterways, river projects, waterway reclamation and stabilization. These are big things that are going on in the interior of the United States in the post-war period. It's a hangover popular project. It's also a great jobs creation project, especially in the Mountain West and in the High Plains and up and down the Missouri River. All of these kinds of things are very, very important. Okay, so we get that project, Proposed Practices for Economic Analysis of River Basin Projects. It was called the Green Book. And you'll see if you ever read anything about benefit cost analysis, they'll often refer to the Green Book. So that's the first time that we get rules. This effort was highly influential, and it established standards, and those standards were very important. And they were grounded now for the first time, at least explicitly, in welfare economics principles. Remember I talk about Jules Dupuy? That's right. And those were the principles that were used. And this led then to what later became the federal government's Bureau of the Budget. And the Bureau of the Budget is the precursor to the Office of Management and Budget that we have now at the federal level, which basically oversees all of the financial activities and the decision-making activities with regard to projects, procedures, and rules and regulations for engaging in projects and or procedures. That's what we call OMB. Well, back then it was called the Bureau of the Budget, and they issued, out of now the federal government's central overseeing agency, what was called Budget Circular A47. And that established guidelines for benefit cost analysis for all water projects in the United States. So we get rules, and we're getting these rules, and they're evolving over time. And then we move on a little bit more, and we get what's called the President's Water Resource Councils, policy standards and procedures in the formulation, evaluation, and review of plans for use and development of water and related land resources. Now we're starting to move out of water and into projects that affect land and land quality and land reclamation. And again, that's supplanted Circular A47. So what we're getting, and this is the development, and I'm just going to plow through this a little bit. What we're getting is government activity obtaining what we call a positive or a rule-based, science-based, and a procedure-based set of either mechanisms or guidelines for evaluation. Now, this has some antecedents as well. Coming out of World War II, we had a tremendous increase in social sciences, the planning sciences, business administration, and public administration. Now, in 1960, we get a book called The Economics of Defense in the Nuclear Age. You remember we had the nuclear scare and the, oh, you don't remember, I remember. The arms race and the evil Russians and all of the things that we had to deal with. This book was written by a couple of people named Hitch and McKeon of the Rand Corporation. The Rand Corporation back then was a very prominent think tank. And it ended up being the Bible of the defense industry. Well, anyway, it involved implementation of this think tanks had come up with a set of what they considered best practices and procedures for planning, budgetary, and analytic methods for management and decision making. So again, it's rational decision making. It became known as PPBS, Planning, Programming, and Budgeting Systems. It was implemented in the U.S. Defense Department early then by the Robert McNamara. This is in the Kennedy administration. And then it was applied to other segments of federal procurement and policy development and project development during the Johnson administration. Well, PPBS, it began with sets of objectives that government outputs are analyzed. The outputs, the consequences, the results of government are to be analyzed. They're actually going to be quantified and measured and valued in one way or another. Program costs are measured for multiple years. It's not just the annual costs of something, but it's a stream of costs over time. Allowances for comparisons of alternative approaches. It mandated that if you had an idea and you wanted to do Project A, you were to consider alternatives. You needed to demonstrate that Project A was superior to B, C, D, or E. And it had to use common and accepted analytic techniques. Well, this time I said it was a time of the rationalization of the social sciences, and we also tried to infuse quite a lot of rational decision making and scientific principles and mathematical procedures and the language of physics, the language of biology, the language of engineering is getting injected into decision making and into planning and program development, community development, and government systems. And all of this we got the comprehensive decision makers. These are Herbert Simon. These are people that are like planning, programming, budgeting systems, said that the best way to make government decisions is to begin with a comprehensive and an all-encompassing approach. There was another school of thought by people who said, oh, don't be silly. We've gotten to where we are by making a series of reasoned choices and decisions, and society is made better by making decisions on an incremental basis. We make decisions on the margins to either improve something or to eliminate something that doesn't seem to be serving us well anymore. But we're not capable, we're not smart enough, we don't have enough time, and it's too expensive to engage in incremental decision making. And so we have an inevitable battle between comprehensivists and incrementalists, and all the books I read when I was young had to do with dealing with this. Later on, we get variations of planning, programming, and budgeting systems. We get management by objective under the Nixon administration, and that's nothing more than just a redefinition of what constitutes planning, programming, and budgeting systems. Then we get something in the Carter administration. Theirs was something called zero-based budgeting, which meant that periodically government programs needed to justify themselves right from the beginning, and ideally every project and program would be justifiable from its root to its branch annually over some established review period. And again, the underlying basis for these movements or trends or fads were that outcomes or public goods were measurable and on an annual or a project basis when compared to public outlays. Those are our costs. and that some systematic mechanism was necessary to reasonably choose among competing projects, programs, and ideas. So you can see what we've been doing here. It's part of a mechanism for decision making, and then it's also part of a larger process of and we have variations that go beyond this, and I'll pick them up in the next lecture, next session here. But but what we have is this process that went from rivers and ports and dams and canals to dealing with flood control, to dealing with land reclamation, to dealing with all manner now of public programming. We get it in defense and defense contracting. We start to get it in all manner of public decision making. And you would have seen the implementation of both these styles of decision making and benefit cost analysis in transportation systems, in the emerging interstate highway systems, in public transportation, high speed or air or other kinds of transportation systems. So you're seeing it in the big physical infrastructure areas where society was spending a tremendous amount of money during the 50s and the 60s and on into the 70s. Now when we get into the 70s, things change, and that's going to be the jumping off part of where we start the next session.